All right, we are officially beginning. Hello, everybody. My name is Jill Escher. I'm president of NCSA, and welcome to the latest in our NCSA webinar series. Today, we have a wonderful guest. We always do. We're going to address something a little bit different today. We've actually had Karen Fessel on one of our webinars several years back, but it really is time for a refresher and time to talk more about insurance. We get a lot of questions from people about insurance, both public insurance and private insurance, as it pertains to a whole variety of services, whether it's medical care, dental care, residential treatment, emergency care, crisis care, ABA, of course, behavioral treatments, so many things. I mean, honestly, I think we could do like a 10-hour webinar on this particular topic. It just has so many ramifications in our children's lives. So who we have today with us is the great and wonderful Karen Fessel, who is here in California with me. She has been a longtime autism advocate. She has a son who is on the spectrum. She worked with our founding vice president, Feda Al-Malidi, may she rest in peace, very, very closely on autism insurance reform in the state of California, which is how I think Karen kind of got into this business. And now she is the executive director of the Mental Health and Autism Insurance Project, which is an amazing nonprofit that works with countless families about obtaining or using the right insurance, to get the right services. Karen will tell you more about that. We had a little glitch in terms of figuring out how to run the slides. This happens sometimes. So I'm going to share my screen. Karen, when you want me to change slides, all you have to do is let me know and I will do it. Also, please feel free to submit questions in Q&A. We will get to those at the end of the presentation, most likely. And we can go, till at least 5:15 at least. So I think we'll have plenty of time. With that, allow me to share my screen. And I'm going to turn off my video.
So,
okay.
so you
And
folks out in, I'm reading, there's an AI assistant helping.
There we are.
Take
It's
notes.
okay, Karen. It's up.
Okay,
We
great.
actually got the slides
Okay,
to work.
so this is about the nuts and bolts of getting ASD services covered for those with autism. And it's really sort of what I've learned through the many years of being on the job in this field. And I'm going to share it with you. Okay, next slide. This is, by the way, www.mhautism.org. That is our website, and we have a lot of information up there. And so if you have questions, they might be up there. It doesn't cover everything, but there's a lot of information there. So we are a nonprofit. We formed in 2009. I think it was 2006. Parents came together at the state level. California was holding these town halls, and legislators wanted to hear from parents about what was working and what wasn't working with autism. And one of the things that came out of one of those early meetings in 2006, where I first met Feda Al-Malidi, and Kristen Jacobson, if you're out there, Kristen, was that insurance really was not providing services that our children with autism needed. A lot of it, some of it was being provided by the school district, some of it was provided by regional center, and this is California specific, and I know this is a national meeting, but our kids with autism were getting very little from insurance, and they weren't really recognizing it as something that they had to cover, even though California had a parity law which required that it be covered. They had a mental health parity law that specifically named autism as a covered benefit. So we formed in 2009, and we expanded in 2016 to work with families. We started out with autism families that needed residential treatment, and then we realized that there were so many in the field that needed residential treatment, and they weren't able to get it. And so we shifted our focus a little to expand to include those with other mental health conditions as well. We're active in policy work and advocacy. We worked on the insurance mandate that passed in 2012. We worked a little bit on the Medi-Cal mandate that passed in 2014. And we worked recently on Senate Bill 855, which is the expansion of the California Mental Health Parity Act. And as a general matter, we work closely with state regulators and policymakers, people at where we're now working with the feds. The Department of Labor has become interested in mental health parity now as well. And so we try to feed the systemic problems back to the regulators so that they understand what isn't working. And there's a lot about insurance that doesn't work. So when we see systemic problems, we speak up and we try to implement change on a systemic level. Next slide. Jill, thank you. So a lot of what we do is we advise families on how to get insurance to pay for autism and mental health services. We field questions from, we have, it's called info@mhautism.org. We field questions there, and we also take phone calls, and we'll answer people's questions, and we'll give them about 20 minutes to a half an hour of individualized advice if that's what they need. So we give out sort of advice and information. We obtain pre and ongoing authorizations from insurance, mainly for residential mental health treatments. We write appeals and grievances when services are denied. That's sort of our main staple. And we often request regulatory involvement. So that can be when the final appeal has been denied. We might go to either the state regulator or an external review, or we might go to the federal, the Department of Labor, EBSA, if there's like some kind of problem with administrative issues. We offer a sliding scale hourly rate based on income to families. And we feed the information back to legislators and policymakers on the state level, and even on the federal level. Those who oversee the regulators are the legislators, and so it's important to know that. So if you're not getting the services you need from your state regulatory agency, you can reach out to constituent services, part of your local, like if it's a state issue, you would reach out to your state senator or your state representative. In California, it's called assembly member, and they have offices of constituent services. And so they can help with getting the attention of the regulator if the regulator isn't dealing with you. And sometimes that's what it takes. Or if you feel that you've been egregiously handled by your insurance company and you want your legislator to know. And we also put out quarterly newsletters. We have a website with a lot of how-to info. We offer educational seminars in the community and at conferences. That's pretty much what we do. Next slide, please. Thank you. That's my son. That's Aaron. He is now 29. I can't believe he's 29. He got his AA from Merritt College, which is in our community college system, in early childhood education, and he works in a preschool, and he really likes it, and it works for him. He lives in the community in a program that they like. The regional center comes, they have an arrangement with the regional center. The regional center sends, they pay for services where someone comes in and helps him with, finances and a little bit of this and that. He can do his own shopping, and he can do a lot on his own. He drives, and he does a lot of, he helps with the family. My parents moved out here 2 years ago during COVID, and my dad doesn't drive at all anymore, and my mom doesn't drive at night. He does a lot of like chauffeuring of we call them the olds, and he looks out for them and visits them, and he's pretty involved. So he's been very helpful. It was tough in the early years, and he's much more involved right now. Like, he's much more helpful. Next slide, please. So it gets better. That's what I'm trying to say. Even if they're at a severe level, it can't, there, it, it goes in phases. So also, autism checks many boxes. It falls into many categories. It's a developmental condition. I could say disability, but for some, it's more of a condition or a way of being. And it usually presents from birth or soon thereafter. It's also categorized as a a communication disorder. It's also characterized as a brain-based disorder, and it's also characterized as a mental health condition. And the importance of this is that it gives us more rights in the healthcare system. The developmental disability condition gives us rights with the developmental disability system of care, and the mental health characterization gives us entree into the mental health category under our health benefits. And so it's important to know we have entree into two sets of services because of that. Um, so so there are laws at the federal level, and that many states have laws which confer some protections on people with mental health conditions, and especially with respect to insurance. And we also have our own laws with respect to insurance. We have autism mandates that mainly address behavior services. Next slide, please. So why all this interest in coverage for mental health treatment? Well, it's a benefit that we pay for in one form or another. Mental health conditions are medical conditions, and they impact at least 20% of the population, and probably more since COVID. Standards of medical necessity include reducing pain, alleviating disability, and improving functioning. Mental health is one of 10 essential healthcare benefits required to be covered through the Affordable Care Act. Additional protections include parity mandates, and they should make it harder for plans to deny treatments, but and it is harder. It is harder than it was, but we still see a fair amount of denials. Next slide. How long can my child with mental health issues stay on my health plan? Well, due to the Affordable Care Act, age 26, and that's universal, that's for everyone. My daughter is turning 26 this month and has been peppering me with questions on which insurance to switch to. If your loved one is disabled by their mental health condition to the point that they either qualify for SSI, or they don't work, or they work less than they could, like they might not work full time, and they are financially dependent on you in any way, they may be able to stay on your private employer sponsored plan indefinitely. And the way we did that with my son, because he didn't get benefits through his work, was that we asked at work, we asked the HR person at my husband's job, and he asked for a letter from my son's treating psychiatrist. And it was a very simple letter. And we submitted that to him, and he sent it into the plan, and they approved my son for after age 26. And then if they're on Medi-Cal or Medicaid in other states, they may be able to keep that Medicaid policy as secondary. When you retire, if you're eligible for Medicare, they may be eligible as well to become a beneficiary. And I believe you can even elect to leave them your Medicare and SSDI benefits after you die. Yeah. So there's a whole system of care, and it's important to take money out of your child's name and put it in an ABLE account or a special needs trust, or both, if they have more than $2,000 in their accounts, because it can affect their being able to qualify for other public benefits. Next slide, please. So where can I learn about what services are offered through my health plan? Well, there's the plan manual, and it has different names depending on how it's funded. And so there's, it's called the evidence or certificate of coverage if it's state regulated or fully funded, or if you have Medicaid. And the Medicaid plans are supposed to be publicly available. The private plans, you usually, if it's a fully funded plan, meaning state regulated, you can go to log into your website of your insurance company, and usually you can download it, use the search function, and request evidence of coverage manual or plan manual, and usually it will pop up. And so this is it's usually about a 100-page document. And if you have health insurance if you work for a large employer, then it's usually a self-funded, not fully funded plan. And it's called the Detailed Summary Plan Description. The claims are actually paid out by your employer, but they retain the services of what's called a third-party administrator, and that could be Cigna, Aetna, Blue Cross. It could be all of a lot of the same plans that we work with in the fully funded realm. And you would ask your employer for a copy of that document. In some states, it will say DOI on the back of your card or on the front of your card, usually at the bottom. And that means that it's a fully funded plan. If you get the manual, the long form, you can tell. And if you work for an employer with more than 1,000 employees, it's usually self-funded. And when it's self-funded, it means that federal law applies. If it's fully funded, a smaller employer, or an individual plan that you buy on the exchange, those are going to be regulated in the state, either where the company is headquartered or where you live, because you're supposed to buy a plan in the state in which you live. Okay, so that's the background on self-funded versus fully funded, and the rules are different. We have in TRICARE is, I'm reading this, TRICARE is it's a little bit different. It's run by the Department of Defense. And if you work for the government, that's a little different too. If you work for the federal government, it's regulated by a department called FEP, Federal Employment Program, and OMB, Office of, I can't remember what it stands for. It's regulated by the federal government. And then if you work for a county or a state or a city, you have to get the manual and find out how it's regulated, because sometimes they're in their own little category and sometimes they're regulated through the state. So it really just depends. Next slide, please. Fully funded plans in California. More of the information I have is in California because we are based here. I know Jill is, but I know a lot of you are not, and I apologize for that. California is the state I know the most about, but we work in a lot of states. And so I do know rules in other states as well. California, most of the plans are regulated by the Department of Managed Healthcare, even though your plan may not be a managed healthcare plan. Fully funded plans are subject to the federal mental health. Most plans in most states are there although they are subject to state law, they are also subject to the Federal Mental Health Parity Act. And they're also subject to state mental health and autism mandates. So they're subject to all of these laws. And it matters because state regulators will sometimes intervene in ways that federal regulators may not. They will take a more active role in things. So it's important to know. Medical disputes can be resolved through an independent review process. This is a federal right that's many states carry it out, but there are certain states that let the feds handle it, but you do have access to an external review. In California, the overturn rates for mental health, and that includes autism, are quite high, about 60% or more. And so it tends to be a little bit more fair than if you have a self-insured plan. One of my gripes, and I've been griping to the Department of Labor about this for quite a while, is that the employer or the employer's agent for self-funded plans, they get to choose the companies that they use for external review. And if they get a lot of overturns from one company, they can just choose not to work with that company. So there is a certain amount of bias in the process, and there is a certain amount of bias in the state regulated process as well, but it's a little less biased than the self-funded arena. Medi-Cal managed care are regulated in California by the Department of Healthcare Services. And some of the laws are the same as they are for the commercial market, and some of the laws are different. And you may be entitled. One of the things that I think is helpful if you're really getting jerked around by your Medi-Cal or Medicaid managed care plan, in most states, you have the right to go to a fair hearing. And if you speak well and you know your stuff, it can be helpful to be able to go and appear and argue why a service needs to be covered. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Federal Mental Health Parity and Addiction Act. This is a federal law. It passed in 2008 with the stimulus package. Remember, the economy was kind of in the tank, and there was all these scandals on Wall Street back in 2008. Anyway, Congress passed all these laws. It was at the end of the Bush administration, actually, and the federal MAPIA, which is how it's pronounced, sort of slid through as like an add-on to the stimulus package. It requires that mental health treatment be no more restrictive than substantially all medical and surgical treatments with respect to co-payments, deductibles, visit limits. And these are called the quantitative treatment limitations. These are things that you can easily assign a number to, and you can see if it's better or worse than in medical surgical treatments. However, there's been a lot of talk by the federal government and revisions in recent years that requires that speaks to the non-quantifiable treatment limitations, or NQTLs. And a part of the mental health MAPIA requires a broad scope of therapies be covered, and it prevents limitations based on type of facility, geographical limitations, and network adequacy. So these are examples of non-quantitative treatment limitations, and there are many others as well. And the federal law extends to nearly all plans through the Affordable Care Act. In the Affordable Care Act, there is a requirement that mental health treatment be covered as one of 10 essential health benefits. And so basically what they said is, well, if it's required to be covered, it needs to be covered in accordance with this federal MAPIA law. And so in terms of 14 years or so, 15, 16 years, it's still a relatively new law, and interpretations are still being challenged in the court. And there's been a lot of recent litigation. I'd say the past 10 years, there's been a fair amount of litigation on mental health parity issues. And it applies to exchange plans in the individual market, larger employer plans. It's supposed to apply to Medi-Cal managed care plans, but honestly, it doesn't do a very good job of it. And we need more challenges in that area. And there are some government and grandfathered plans that are excluded, but recent legislation passed that is making those sort of exclusions fade out. They're being faded out. Next slide, please. So in California, we have an improved mental health Parity Act. It was It was the championed by Senator Scott Wiener. He's represents San Francisco, and it includes all like the previous one in California had basically special benefits for one of 10 mental health conditions, and it included autism. This one includes all disorders in the DSM, and it requires that health plans use medical necessity standards that are evidence-based and developed by professional organizations rather than developed by for-profit institutions. There was a famous court case called the Witt case. And one of the things that they argued was it was against United Healthcare. And one of the things that they argued was that Witt made it so that United, what they were doing was they were using their own guidelines. Had developed their own treatment guidelines, and it was designed to save them money. And they found that this interfered with their what's called a fiduciary duty, a duty to look out for the best interests of the members. And the trial court found that, and it has since been it was overturned on appeal, and now it's been sort of overturned again. It's in a weird sort of state. But a lot of the individual cases from the Witt case are going back. They're being sent back to be re-reviewed, and that's a good thing. The California Parity Act must provide all medically necessary treatments, including intermediate levels of care, and they must treat underlying conditions, not just address the current crisis. Because if they don't, what the experts have testified to is that they'll just be a revolving door. If they just treat what's going on that led to like a hospitalization and get that under control, it's going to come back again, and it might even be worse. And so they need to get to the root of the problem and not just keep sort of treating with a Band-Aid the immediate crisis. It also requires that they err on the side of caution and safety in making medical necessity determinations. If there's any doubt about whether someone meets a certain level of care, it's always better to mark it up, like overtreat it rather than undertreat it, because overtreating is safe and undertreating results in harm. And it also requires that they treat to maintain function and prevent deterioration, that continuous progress is not necessary as long as they are maintaining function and not deteriorating. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now the next part of the slide just sort of talks about the nuts and bolts of working with insurance. Next slide. So where to start? Start by calling your plan. And this is what we tell people. We often get calls from families that have newly diagnosed kids, and they're like, what do I do? And so I tell them to call the number on the back of the card and explain that your loved one needs mental health treatment. And in Medi-Cal, it's often the County Mental Health Department Access Program. Do not understate the problem when you're talking to insurance. You might need to sort of emphasize the problems. If you say, oh, it's really not that bad, they will like take that and run with it sometimes. So be specific about the type of program that your child needs. For many of you, my child needs someone that has expertise in dealing with children with autism. If they're really young, my provider needs to have expertise in dealing with very young children with autism. Children with autism cannot just see anyone on a list. I put this in all my appeals. It is a difficult condition to treat, and it needs to be managed by those that have the expertise. And then we encourage you to describe what is going on and what type of treatment you are seeking. So that's when you call the number on the back of the card, especially if it's a mental health number. And if you can't find anyone that is appropriate, you might want to ask them for a list of providers. We encourage people to get a list of who's in their network. And it's going to save you a lot of time and trouble if you can work with someone in your network. And sometimes we encourage you to show that list to a support group that you go to, or maybe your pediatrician. And if they know anyone on the list, that might be a good place to start. If no one has the appropriate expertise on the list, you might have to call down the list. But if nobody has expertise in autism, you might need to call the plan back and ask them to help you find an appropriate provider. The new California parity law requires that they help you arrange services when the network is inadequate. But if you're in another state, they still have that duty. You might need to tell them, I need your help in finding someone. If you're in a PPO, you can usually see anyone, but it's still a good idea to explore the network first, because the plan will pay at a higher rate if you can show that they didn't have anyone in their network. And the therapist may take responsibility for filing the claims. And risk not getting paid, and they may go to bat for you with the plan if they work with insurance as a general matter. Next slide. Whenever you call your plan, keep a notebook or a communication log. Write down the date and time, who you spoke with, was there any resolution reached, and then always request a reference number. Next slide. Explore your plan's network, make an effort to obtain a list, call down the list, mark it up. Okay to show the list to your doctor. I said the support group, consultant, others in the know to get a sense of who is good. If when you call down that list, if there's no return phone call in 24 hours, that's a no. If there's a waiting list, that's a no. If they don't see kids with autism, or if they don't see kids, or if your child is an adult and they don't see the adults, that's a no. If you get no hits, call the plan back and tell them that their network is insufficient. And if they won't help you find a provider or placement, go back to your friends or support group and look out of network. And then once you found a provider, you call the plan again and tell them you're requesting a single case agreement or a network exception. And you're following up on a prior call, and you can give them the reference number. Okay, so this is about getting paid as though it's in network, even though it's not, because a lot of times the mental health networks are woefully inadequate. Next slide. And then California has network adequacy standards that require an initial visit with a mental health provider within 10 days or 2 days if it's urgent, and within 15 miles or a 30-minute drive of the home. And then there's information on this at DMHC's website. PPO and open choice plans are also obliged to have an adequate network. And if they do not, they must offer to cover services so that you pay at your in-network rate. And they might try to tell you, oh, that's why you have out-of-network services. No, it's not. You have out-of-network services so that if the network is adequate, you have the choice to choose someone else. But they still have an obligation to provide a network in most plans. Occasionally, you'll find an old-fashioned fee-for-service plan where they don't have that, but it's unusual. Providers may need to obtain pre-authorization for certain benefits, and they may need to check in with the plan to provide regular updates. It's called utilization review. So you need to find out if that's the case, and there may be extra responsibilities that they're not used to working with. So, that is something that you and your provider may need to work out. You may be able to hire someone to do this for you if the provider won't do it. And we do some of that, bridging the gap in certain circumstances. Next slide. So what is pre-authorization? It's asking permission first. With managed care plans, you usually need this for most services. For outpatient care, they'll usually give you a certain number of sessions, and then the therapist will need to check back in after those sessions have been used to request more sessions. And most plans have, they might limit speech and OT for other conditions, but they're not supposed to limit them for mental health conditions, because it's not a one-to-one comparison. Like, you're not comparing speech therapy for mental health conditions to medical conditions. You're comparing speech therapy for mental health conditions to all outpatient services, and most outpatient services don't require pre-authorization. I'm sorry, don't limit the number of visits that you can that you have. So clinical history. So facilities. This is for facilities. I don't think this is relevant. You don't need. This is what a facility needs to present. Um, and for ABA, if they tell you that pre-authorization is not needed and care will be covered, this is unusual. And so make sure you get a reference number, write down the details of the calls, who you spoke with, and you can later verify that this happened. No, no, it's not specific to California. There are no limits on speech and OT in mental health. That is part of the Federal Parity Act. And if they are limiting that, that is a violation, and we can help you with that, or we can help you help yourself with that. If care is denied or less hours that are requested are approved, request a denial letter in writing for the portion of treatment that is not covered. They're supposed to provide it within 5 days. Do not let them push you to do a phone appeal. Tell them that you need to review their denial in writing and talk to your team before you can consent to a expedited fast appeal. So that's my advice, is review their reason for denial in writing. You can also request clinical information that was used in making the decision about the denial. You're legally entitled to that, and they're legally required to provide it. In the denial letter, it often says, call this number if you need the guidelines that were used or clinical information related to this denial. And I encourage people to call the number and get the information, have them email, fax it, or whatever way that you use. I would try not to get them, like, ask them if they can put it, post it to your link on the website, so that, because you want to get it and you don't want to have to wait in the mail. It can take a really long time. Next slide, please. What needs to go on the invoice? Well, I'm just going to explain this very quickly because this is more of a provider issue, but they need the provider's name, address, phone number, NPI, which is a National Provider Identifier Number, and tax ID number. They need name, address, date of birth, and diagnoses of the client, the patient. And then for each date of service, they need a procedure code and the units used and the charges per procedure code, and then the total cost. If it's not complete, you can ask your provider to redo it. If you submit it, you should go to your plan website, and they might have questions that you have to answer in advance, or you might need to fill out a member claim form. And then you would submit it with the invoice, or the invoice would go with the like the questions that you had to fill out ahead of time. And you do that via the online portal. And sometimes you need to provide proof of payment, which would be a receipt saying that it's been paid, or sometimes it would be a canceled check or a Visa statement. And the member portal should prompt you for what is needed, and call or check online a few days later to make sure it was received. And they're supposed to process and pay, deny, or request more info for claims within 30 days. And if they don't, you can complain to the regulator, at least in California. But I think it's worth a phone call and following up on, hey, what happened to those claims? Next slide, please. Medi-Cal, Medicaid. What is available may vary by state and by county. If your mental health issues are moderate to severe in California, it's supposed to be managed in the county mental health system. But autism is typically managed in the plan itself. Most counties have an access program to determine if you qualify, and access is supposed to offer, this is through county mental health, psychodiagnostic evaluations, regular therapy, medication management, interpretation if needed, and matching to an appropriate therapist if needed, referral to crisis care, which may include inpatient treatment, and substance use disorder may be handled in a separate system. It is not clear that all counties offer a full spectrum of care, as is required by federal mental health parity. And this is a problem. A lot of them don't offer residential treatment or what is it called? IOP, intensive outpatient, or partial hospital. And some of them don't even offer hospitalization. So county legal aid can sometimes help with appeals. It should say in a denial letter what organization can help with appeals, and what is available through Medicaid varies from state to state and county to county. I wish it was a better system, and it's not. Next slide, please. Two types of denials. If denied, carefully review the reason. There are two basic types. There's a medical necessity denial, and they have to tell you why it's not medically necessary, and they're supposed to provide clinical information, including guidelines that they use to make that determination. And they're not just supposed to say you didn't meet our guidelines, and you're going to need the guidelines if you get that kind of answer. And then not a covered benefit or a dispute about payment. These are called administrative denials. And we still sometimes see these for autism, less so than we used to. We used to see them all the time. It should be dealt with in the school. This is an educational benefit. What are some other reasons? This is not a covered benefit. This is an excluded service, or they pay a really low rate. You can dispute those too. For an out-of-network provider. Next slide, please. Medical necessity denials. This can be used to deny at the start of treatment or later. And if it's later, it would be a continuing care denial. They must tell you why it is not medically necessary in writing, and make sure you request that written denial letter. Common reasons we're seeing: you are making progress and no longer need treatment. We see that with ABA all the time, even when the kids are still substantially below where they, where age typical kids are at the same age. You have not made adequate progress. In certain states, they cannot deny for that reason, as long as you're not deteriorating. You do not meet our clinical criteria. Often clients meet the guidelines, but the plans just don't want to pay. And so that's why you need to get those clinical criteria, or your provider needs to get those clinical criteria so they can argue how you do meet them. In some state and some health plans, the standard is no longer about making progress. Preventing deterioration or maintaining functioning is also a valid reason for continuing treatment. Next slide, please. Why is it, if you get an administrative denial, if it's not covered or if it's underpaid, why is it not covered? Is this reason written in the plan manual? If it's not written, it's a hidden exclusion, and hidden exclusions are illegal. If it's not paid appropriately, you can dispute this and request that they reprocess, or call them to find out why they paid the way they paid, and ask for their payment information that says sometimes they pay a certain percentage of Medicare. If it's private insurance, Medicaid rates are supposed to be published. The deductible must be first taken out. The facility, if it's an out-of-network provider, they can pay a percentage of a very low rate and say that the rate is the usual and customary rate. And so the plan is responsible for describing how they arrived at the usual and customary rate. And we have we have a complaint in with the Department of Labor. They're investigating Microsoft paid a really low rate for residential treatment, and they're investigating it. I think they just thought it was just unacceptably low. Common reasons for administrative denials. This we see with like facilities, doesn't meet health plan criteria. Services are educational, can be provided in school and are not covered. Pre-authorization wasn't obtained. Read what your plan manual says about this. There may be a one-time penalty for failing to get pre-authorization, or there may be a post-service review option. And many of these issues can be disputed, and especially if it's not in the plan manual. And some regulators will not allow plans to deny for failing to get pre-authorization or for other administrative reasons. So it's worthwhile to find out. Next slide. California has a special law called Assembly Bill 1324. Gosh, I can't remember the year. I think it's 2008. It's a really old bill, but not many people know about it. It prevents plans from rescinding authorizations. Rescinding authorization is like a take back or a clawback. Once a plan authorizes services and the provider delivers the services, this is the exact wording of the law. The plan may not rescind or modify the authorization for any reason. If you have that authorization number, included in your appeal, and request the authorization in writing. And this applies to Medi-Cal as well. So if they ever try to do a take back, they're really not allowed in the state of California. Next slide. Denial letter. Okay, clearly identify the services that are being denied, including the provider, date of service. Oh, this is what the health plan must do. They're supposed to identify what's being denied, what provider, when, and the type of service, and they need to tell you why they are denying. They can't just say not medically necessary. And they're also supposed to tell you what standard or guideline was used in making the determination. And they're supposed to make the documents used in the decision available to you upon request, and we tell people to request them and get a tracking number for the call in case they don't send them. And then they must instruct you on the next steps, including how to initiate the appeal and request an external review if it's available. It's not always available if it wasn't denied for medical necessity. They must disclose availability and contact information of a state consumer assistance office. In California, it's called the California Health Alliance. If the plan fails to adhere to the requirements and it impedes the process, the claimant has exhausted the appeal and can proceed to the next step. And that would be external review or litigation. And this is all part of federal law, and it can be found at that citation. Next slide. Some plans allow one level of appeal. Most state regulated plans allow one level. Others allow two levels, and some allow an optional second level appeal. The plan is supposed to respond to your appeal in 30 days. And if continuing care or treatment is being cut back, you can request an expedited appeal, but do make sure you get that written denial letter before you do the expedited appeal. That is my advice. Typically, you have 180 days to respond to the first level appeal, and sometimes you only have 60 days to respond to the second level appeal. So make sure you read the instructions and also the instructions in the plan manual. Plans often want you to appeal by phone, and we recommend that you don't do that. We recommend that you create a paper trail. If they have multiple levels of appeal, yeah, you can do it on the first level. It's not a bad thing, just to see what way the wind is blowing. Occasionally they do reverse themselves, but more often than not, they don't. When we take a case, we carefully review the reason for denial and try to address that. Somebody sent me a question, when should we reach out to us, to my office for assistance? You can do it at the point you have a written denial. That's easiest for me, because then we know really what they're dealing with. And when they tell the provider things or they tell you things, it often doesn't make it into the letter, and it's what they put in writing that we take most seriously. If the denial is based on medical necessity, When we take an appeal, we describe the deficits that require remediation, and we look closely at the goals. How does the client meet the plan guidelines? And we may bring in national guidelines, CASP guidelines for ABA providers. I found them very helpful. ASHA has guidelines for speech therapy. We prefer to use the guidelines developed by professional societies, but it may be necessary to also use the guidelines that the plan is using. Next screen. Next slide. So this is just sort of an overview of what we include. Name, plan number, date of birth, diagnoses, describe the denial, describe what you are requesting, what services you're requesting, and then include references to attachments that you would reference at the end, but I put them in the body of the document when someone else is helping, if someone else is helping you, or, I put in the client release form. I often include the diagnostic report, especially for autism, and I include their own denial letter. I describe the history, including behaviors that have been going on, deficits, interventions that have been tried, medications that have been tried. Safety is an important factor, and if your child is injuring themselves in the process, like if they're headbanging or, they have a lot of self-injurious behaviors, that is very important to mention. Police reports, those can be helpful. Letters from therapists, progress reports. For continuing care, I describe the progress that's been made, but I also describe what needs to be continued. Both, I know that the CASP guidelines require, that they meet all their goals. And most of our kids don't meet all their goals. They make new goals to get to the point where they're indistinguishable from their typical peers. That's kind of the standard that CASP uses. What needs to happen before the client can be safely discharged from treatment? That's an important thing to underscore. If they're denied for failing to meet plan criteria, go through the criteria, or go through the national criteria. And it's okay to cite specific studies, meta-analyses, position papers from professional organizations if you think they help your argument. It's important to have the provider write a letter stating why treatment is necessary and describe what's been going on, especially for continued care. And then I conclude, summarize, and restate. This is a lot of information. Next slide. If your appeal's denied, internal appeals are often denied. Sometimes real justice doesn't happen until external review, regulatory intervention, or litigation. And it can take a while to get to that level. If you're denied for payment or administrative issues in many states, the regulator will review and intervene. And if denied for medical necessity, sometimes external review is the right move, but sometimes litigation is the right move. And it really just depends on what's going on, how much money has been spent, or how much money is at stake. That's often an issue. A lot of lawyers don't want to get involved until you've spent close to $100,000. And I know that seems insane, but that's what I've been told. Now, for ABA and for severe autism, it might be a little different. And sometimes they will like chart new ground, and they will offer, deals if it's new territory and they really believe in it. So next slide, please. External review, it goes out to an agency that is unaffiliated, and it has usually a psychiatrist or maybe a doctor level BCBA will review the appeal. They'll review clinical files and other relevant documents to determine if services were and are medically necessary. And if a plan is regulated by the state, often the states will publish their overturn rates. So you can explore that before you decide whether to go for external review or litigation. Next slide. We're almost done, I promise. The laws are in place for litigation. Generally, the health plans are not following them. Class actions can promote lasting change industry-wide. And most of the lawyers that I work with that are insurance experts, they work on contingency. So if they think you have a good chance of winning, or if they can get a settlement and enough money is at stake, they sometimes will take the cases. And sometimes it's the best option, even though it's not fun. Next slide. That's it. We're done. No, okay. Working with insurance takes time and support from clinical staff. Choose your battles carefully. Like, don't go to the mat for like a little thing that you can call the health plan and get fixed. Like, do that first. Establish relationships with your state and federal representatives. They have a person that does constituent services, and let them know when you cannot get the care that you or your child needs. News media can have an impact, and most health plans do not want bad publicity. Is it Politico? Politico is doing stories on a series of stories on mental health parity right now. And there have been Jocelyn Weiner she's in California. She's been doing them on the state level. It's worth the fight. Don't give up, and we can sometimes help. Sometimes we can't, but we can try. That's it. Questions?
Thank you, Karen.
You are
So I'm
welcome.
going to stop
Q&A.
share there.
Um,
Woo, that was a lot of
I
information.
know it was a ton of
I'm
information. I'm
like,
sorry, and it came at you really fast, all of you. I know.
yeah, so I'm glad we recorded it because I have a
Yeah,
feeling
and
if
it's
people
also
weren't
I can
taking,
give you the slides, and I talked from the slides. You know.
yes, yes. So people can go back. You don't have to memorize everything Karen talked
Yeah,
about,
no.
but so many good tips. And there, insurance affects so many different angles and so many things that our kids need. So let's go to, I see there's chat. I'm going to go to Q&A. I know you answered some of the questions, Karen.
I think I saw the other ones that popped up, the chat, but not the Q&A.
Okay, so let's go through some of them and just see how much we can get through. But people, feel
Okay.
free to post more. I'm sure you have specific questions about your particular circumstances. Are there more or less options available if Medicare through SSDI is primary insurance with Medicaid as secondary? Interesting.
Not for, well, they don't do ABA, but there are more providers in general that take Medicare. It pays better than Medicaid. And
Pays better.
so
Okay.
it really kind of depends on what services your kid is needing. Um,
Mhm.
like, yeah, I would say as a general matter, yeah, I think I would do the Medicare option if it's an option. And then they can
Mhm.
provide for secondary, and they often defer to the primary, but if it's a benefit is not offered by the primary and it is through the secondary, then they have to cover it. But you might have to impress that upon them. Some Medicaid agencies can be very bureaucratic.
Not a surprise. I'm interested in insurance coverage for outpatient ECT.
Yeah. It might be a problem in some states for if your child is under 18. If they're over 18, it should not be a problem. And if they're under
Mhm.
18, it varies by state. But I think you're going to need to research that if your state has an exclusion for it.
Yeah, I've heard similar things that different states have different laws around
Right.
ECT. In California, it's a little more restrictive,
You can't get it
for
for kids in
minors.
California. Is that right? I don't
Well,
know.
you can, but I think you have to go through a judicial review.
Okay. All right. Wow.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that conservatorship, you might have more rights for your adult child and even your minor child after age 12 if you've conserved them. If you've conserved them.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Yeah, a whole
yeah,
other topic. Very
I
important.
know. I
And
know.
in other states, of course, that's called guardianship. In California, it's called
Oh,
conservatorship.
okay. Thank you.
Um, how
Yeah.
about training for social executive functioning, career looking for job training for a young adult son? So
Okay, we
I
went
guess
through
that's sort
that.
of behavior services. Does that fit somewhere, Karen?
Well, social functioning is part of, I think, skills that you get. Like my son definitely had a lot of that. That you get. Sometimes ABA provides it, sometimes speech therapy provides it, and sometimes mental health provides it. And so it really depends on who you're working with. But any of those licensed providers can offer, like, and usually they do it in groups. So that's a different issue from vocational. The vocational thing we went through with my son, it took a lot of fighting. Um, so I had to go through regional center, which is a California thing, and I got what's it called, the Department of Rehab involved. And in other states, you might be able to go directly to a Department of Rehab. In California, I had to go through regional center and get them to approve it, and then we got it. So it varies by state, but most states do have a Department of Rehab, and they will do some of the vocational training.
Very good.
Yeah.
Um,
And there's a lot
okay.
of
Are
stuff out
you
there too. And even stuff with, like, there's different levels of, you know, of functioning that kids can be at and still be eligible for employment training. So I think that it's worth exploring. Anyway, go ahead. Next question.
Yeah, very good. Are you aware that SSI and
Mhm.
HCBS DD waiver individuals are eligible for Medicare and Medicare? I think she means Medicaid
Medicaid.
and Medicare. Check out CalAIM for latest initiatives by DHCS. I don't know what CalAIM
Cal
is.
AIM I've heard
Benef
of. It's a I think they introduce a lot of policy issues. California thing that mainly addresses Medi-Cal, and they've done a lot of like revisions and stuff recently. Um, yeah, they have a lot of initiatives. Beneficiaries can get home care, therapies, coordinated care, and other benefits. Thank you. Well, that's useful information. And that's interesting. And I'm not sure that they can get Medicare unless they have a parent that has already activated their Medicare. But if they do, then they can for
right.
sure. That's my
Yeah,
understanding.
doesn't it take 2 years, right, on SSDI before the child is eligible for
There's a
Medicare?
2 year look back. I think you could qualify them at 18 if they satisfy the 2 year look back, like they have no money in their name. It says afterward, this is for adults. So
Okay. Okay.
yeah, and the parent, I mean, usually most 18-year-olds, well, there might be some, yeah, anyway. We've been told, okay, go
Okay.
ahead.
We've been told our private insurer, Blue Shield, won't cover outpatient ECT for our son, autism and pharmacological treatment resistant psychosis.
Yeah,
So
that sounds like,
does that depend on, is that a parity issue? Does it depend on a particular plan, a particular state? Why is
I
ECT
think it's a
covered
state
sometimes?
thing. If they told you they won't cover it, then you need to get it in writing. And it's an adverse treatment determination. And so they may not call it a denial, but you have a right to that in writing, the reason for the non-coverage issue. And so I encourage you, if they've told you that, tell them you need it in writing so that you can like fully explore the reasons. And really it's so that you can appeal. But you need to see what the reasons are. If it's not in the plan manual, that's not really okay unless there's a state law. There's a law that says that like for minors, if this is a minor that you're talking about, um, I don't know. Okay.
She says they say that Medi-Cal
We'll cover it, but
they
we'll
will
need
need
to drop.
to we need to drop our private insurer first. We have Medi-Cal as primary and
I don't,
private insurance.
wait, Medi-Cal as primary? No, Medi-Cal is never primary. Private insurance is always primary over Medi-Cal. Yeah, I'm pretty sure about that. So by definition, it's
Hmm.
always primary, and you shouldn't have to drop it. You should be able to show them that if it's an excluded benefit, you should be able to show them that, and that's why it's not being covered. It's not being covered because it's not medically necessary, and they should cover it. And if you continue to have problems, you can get in touch with me, or I would probably refer you to legal aid or the California Health Alliance, whatever program is in your county. Like they can put it in writing. Um,
Hmm.
yeah,
Okay.
it's usually the same. California Health Alliance is the legal aid department in the county. Anyway,
Here's another question. If you are in a county that only has partnership healthcare and disallows direct medical, and partnership refuses to do a single case contract with a psychologist for a neuropsych evaluation or with a therapist, they say they will keep looking for an in-network provider. What if it's been over
no,
2 years? What is
no.
the standard for how much time one needs to wait for a mental health
Yeah,
provider before
I
going
mean,
to
is
litigation?
I think this is a Medi-Cal plan, and I would say that you need to take this to the ombudsman or office or the DHCS. You need to file a complaint. It can't be 2 years. There are prompt there are what is it, network adequacy laws for Medi-Cal, and it sounds like that is a network adequacy problem. So I encourage you to file a complaint with the state, DHCS, or it should say it, like you can ask them to put that in writing. They probably won't, but you need reference numbers for the phone calls documenting this is what has been told you by whom. And yeah, and I would write it up and send it to DHCS / the ombudsman office and have them investigate it. No, 2 years is way too long. No.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then I hope you get regional center, like that they're providing something. And if they're not, you should reach out to them. Um,
Is there a similar law to the Improved California Mental Health Parity Act for other states? For me, it's Arizona.
I don't know if Arizona has a specific law on mental health parity. Depending on if you have private insurance, it depends on the type of insurance that you have. And so if it's state regulated insurance, I would, I mean, I don't know. That's the answer. And you can probably go online to the state and see what they have about mental health parity at the state level. You can probably Google that and see.
Okay. If there is a medical diagnosis for autism and we have been on Medi-Cal for 3 years and now have been dropped, I've never had to fill out a yearly review. The reason for being dropped is the review wasn't completed. It's not like autism goes away. Can they drop you?
I think you have to fill it out every year. So I think you need to call them back, or find the form online and fill it out again. That's what I would advise. I think you need to do it every year. No, we know autism doesn't go away, but these are bureaucrats and they don't
Yeah,
care and they don't
they don't
understand.
care.
Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
care.
Is there any requirement for a PPO to cover incontinence supplies?
I don't think so, but in California, Regional Center has done it for children over a certain age. I don't know, maybe they don't anymore. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I would look under. I mean, there are different requirements about like equipment and supplies. Like, but I don't even think it's a
Excuse me.
DMI, dedicated medical device. I don't think it is. So I don't think the PPO can be required to pay for that. I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, I
But
wonder if there's
ask another
other,
source like your DDS, maybe, or Medi-Cal might pay
right.
for that.
Do you have any suggestions on how to get a medical issue into the next DSM? Specifically, it would be good to have insurance cover PDA,
Oh, I've heard of
pathological
that.
demand
Yeah, it's a
avoidance.
form of autism, where they won't do anything. It's like, I guess it's a little bit like ODD. Um,
Yes, I think it's a
it's a
lot like ODD.
medical thing, and I'm trying to think of who's on that
Well, I mean,
committee.
the DSM is a committee of the American
Psychiatrists,
Psychiatric,
right?
yeah,
So it would,
Association.
mm,
And, you can write to them. They have committee chairs for, each of these diagnoses. You can certainly make your case to them. I know there are organizations specifically in the UK, I think devoted to PDA. And so, maybe work with one of those associations to reach out to the APA.
Yeah, it's
All
a
right.
lot of people haven't heard of it. A lot of, mainstream autism providers haven't heard of it.
Yeah, it's a little bit, there's some overlap with ODD and some forms of ADHD. But yeah, I think it's a interesting question. Yeah, I think, as we all know, the DSM needs a lot of reform.
Yes,
But not just
yes,
there.
it does.
All right.
We need
My
to
son has
see
been, oh, go ahead.
addiction issues in there. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, screen addiction. A lot of the kids I work with, and a lot of them are high on the autism spectrum, they have screen addiction. Yep.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
My son has been receiving therapy from the same BCBA for the past several years. At the beginning of the year, the therapist changed the agency where she works, and the ABA therapy is still being provided in my home. So I think that's not a question. She was just responding to somebody else, I think,
Okay.
who asked a question somewhere else. So thank you for that, Anonymous. Um, okay, well, hold on. This is sorry, that's just a
California.
comment.
Okay. Sorry.
Let's see. If I only have Medi-Cal, Santa Clara Family Health Plan, can I get an out-of-network doctor covered
You have to show
for
that they don't
Medi-Cal?
have a doctor in their network to treat what you're trying to get. So it becomes a medical necessity issue. So it's not easy. And I sometimes will tell people to buy a plan on the exchange. That's how hard it is. And they will try to make the doctor work for lower rates too, and they're not very flexible about that. So legally, yeah, they're required to provide an appropriate program, but the reality of it, it's very hard. And I'm sorry for that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We live in New Jersey. My son has been receiving therapy from the same BCBA for the past several years. At the beginning of the year, the therapist changed the
Yeah, that we
agency where
saw.
she works. That's okay. Uh,
Even though
hold
the
on.
therapist
This
is still
is
being billing the same
uh
hourly rate and providing the same services, the allowed amount is lower. Okay, so they're no longer a network.
with a new company than when the
Yeah.
therapist was with the old company. The insurer says we pay different amounts to different
Oh, that's
agencies. Is this
interesting.
legal?
Oh, interesting. So they negotiated a lower amount. So then you must be using out of network benefits. And I heard that's very common in New Jersey. And so assuming if you're not using out of network benefits, it should not affect you. But yeah, it is allowed because clients are allowed, I mean, providers are allowed to negotiate their rates, and that's good that they're actually doing it. Many don't, and then you're at this like between a rock and a hard place, and they won't negotiate. So yeah, they are allowed to negotiate.
Do you have any
Um,
tips about how to find a primary care doctor for adults with autism? We are looking for a doctor who understands developmental disabilities.
um, well, there's someone in San Francisco at UCSF, Clarissa Kripke. It's her job. She's an internist, and she mainly works with kids, people, adults on the spectrum. But I would say ask, gosh, I mean, you could ask your local care parent network. Is that what it's called in Contra Costa? I believe it is. Ask if they know of anyone. And that's the kind of thing a support group could be helpful. And I don't know offhand. Um, yeah.
The person from Arizona just wrote in to mention it's called the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. I found it in Arizona, so it
Oh,
has the
good.
same name as the federal, I guess. Okay,
Oh, I
whatever.
think that's the federal act. That's the
Yeah,
federal
that's the
act, and
federal
it does
act.
apply.
So
It applies to people living in Arizona. Yeah, because it's federal. Um, okay, what
let's see,
is
we have
common
a
in
lot.
New Jersey? Using out of network benefits for ABA. Yes, that is common, more common than in California. And I don't know why that is. I think a lot of them have refused to negotiate with the plans, probably, and the plans have offered very low rates. That's what my thought is as to New Jersey. I
Um,
see it in uh Silicon Valley area too.
we have some, yeah, this is a little bit of comments. I see some questions actually on webinar, and so it's a little bit confusing here. It is, we are at our closing time. It's 5:19. Karen, unless you see something here calling your name, we are going to call it a night. Maybe you can just
Okay.
let people know um, where to reach you. Again, remind them of the website
Okay,
URL.
mhautism.org is the website, and info@mhautism.org is where you can send questions. And our phone number is on there too. You can call. But it may usually we get back to people within a day. We're pretty good about that, but it does vary. So,
Okay.
and
Yeah, that's
OT,
it's amazing what you do. Hey, there's one
thank you.
question, sort of interesting. I just saw it in chat. Because actually I was just talking to somebody else about this. I've obtained a service dog that is being trained for my son with autism. Is there information you can share on getting coverage for this, for service dog?
Oh, well, I would have recommended Canine Companions for Independence. You it's like they don't charge the clients. It's a nonprofit, and you have to comply with a ton of stuff. Like they have tons of rules, but those dogs, I don't believe people pay for them. So but you already have the dog, right? So I don't
It
think so.
looks like it.
What?
Yeah, it looks like it. Is there insurance coverage for
A service dog? I don't
service
think
dog?
so. I mean, yeah,
Interesting.
and if money is, I mean, I don't, how much did you pay? I'm curious. Can you spell the name of doctor in San Francisco?
Oh, someone
Clarissa
answered that already.
Kripke.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, somebody wrote it. Yeah. So
yeah,
she's
yeah.
one person. There are others. I think you really have to just.
Okay, the dog mom says $9,000
Oh,
deposit.
wow.
Total is
Oh.
$30,000. Oh, I can
No,
see why you're interested in insurance
yeah.
coverage.
Now, this organization, what they do is it's an 18-month process. And so maybe that's why they didn't go through it. It's at least 18 months, but I
Mhm.
know people who've gone through it, and they do have a lot of rules that you have to follow. They're pretty strict. Like I couldn't do it. Like I'm too mushy with dogs. Like I'm just, I couldn't do it. I couldn't be strict enough. Um, yeah.
Well, well, thank you so much. It is for all of your time, and what a wide-ranging set of issues you
Well, it
detailed
intersects with
for
everything.
us.
I love
Yes.
your artwork, by the way. I assume it's
Oh,
all
it's all
Sophie.
Sophie Escher, by
Yeah,
the way.
she's
All
good.
background artwork,
All right. Do you know
courtesy
about
of Sophie
creative
Escher.
growth for when she's an adult? We need to have this.
We'll
Check it
have
out.
this conversation.
Go to the MoMA.
Everybody
They're
say thank.
displaying at the MoMA.
Oh, they are? Oh,
Yes.
yes. I love them. I know who you're talking
Yes.
about.
And so she's an artist. Bye.
All right,
Bye,
everybody. Big,
everybody.
big thanks to the great Karen. Everybody, thank you for hanging on. We will post this recording
Okay,
very
great.
soon, and
Yeah, send
you
me
can
the
review
link because I
anything
want
you
to put
want.
it on our website as well.
I will do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Good night,
Okay. Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank
I'm
you.
leaving.
Bye.